This is the second video of the ninth lecture. In this video, I explain what clauses should be included in IT contracts to ensure a high relationship commitment. Let me give you a short summary of the case so that you understand the context of this question. IBK is about to choose a service provider out of 3 finalists to implement its new backend system. IVK has to make a decision about the content of the IT contracts with the service provider. Two camps were formed, hardliners and soft cooperators. And they disagree bitterly, exchanging angry comments in meetings. They disagree about 2 points about this IT contract: the goal of IT contract and the payment method. First, hardliners believe IBK should include painful penalties in the contract to assure the delivery of the software applications according to the promised schedule and quality. Soft cooperators, on the other hand, argue for a less adversarial approach. They believe the IT contract should be used to eliminate ambiguity in the definition of quality and performance. They oppose including penalties that harm the vendor partner. Second, hardliners are interested in front-loading the contract in favor of IVK, so that IVK pay a low price at the beginning of the contract and start high payments after the benefits to IVK started to be realized. Soft cooperators, on the other hand, propose setting up a fair contract from the beginning. The question is how the contract structure should look like and which camp we should get closer to. Let me quickly define what an IT contract is, then I try to answer the question. An IT contract is a written contractual mechanism used by the management as a form of formal control to enforce obligations, promises, and expectations about the IT product or IT service delivered by IT vendors. An IT contract about an IT service is also called a service level agreement, abbreviated as SLA. An SLA has at least two parties: service recipient and service provider. In our case, IBK is the recipient, and Worksop and Servoleaf are the possible service providers. Gu and colleagues suggested a theory that can help us answer the raised question at IBK. The theory suggests a list of clauses to be placed in a contract to have a well-specified agreement. These elements in the contract can transform the written formal agreement into institutionalized unwritten code of conducts that powerfully influence the behaviors of individuals within firms, improving trust and relationship commitment among the service recipient and service provider. In other words, the theory suggests that your contract is not going to be successful if it does not create relational governance which develops trust and commitment. Firstly, the theory suggests that the end goal of a contract is relationship commitment. Commitment entails durability, input, and consistency. That means the goal of placing any clauses in a contract is to increase durability, input, and consistency. Durability is the desire to continue a relationship because of its benefits. It shows a lack of propensity to leave the contract. A committed relationship also entails input, a willingness to be deeply involved in the relationship materialized through the investment of capital, time, and effort. Finally, commitment entails consistency in investment. that shows confidence in the relationship's stability and low uncertainty about its durability. The contract and its elements should also develop trust. Trust is one party's belief that the requirements will be fulfilled through future actions undertaken by the other party. Trust entails benevolence, honesty, and ability. Benevolence means the other party acts in the best interest of you. Honesty means the other party is truthful in dealing with you. Ability means the other party is competent in what has been agreed to do. Therefore, if the other part of the contract is not benevolent or it's incompetence, you do not trust them. Contract clauses should increase these three dimensions of trust. The means to increasing trust and commitment is relational governance. You want the IT contract to increase relational strength, harmonious conflict resolution, and mutual dependence so that trust and commitment are improved. Relational strength is improved if behaviors are directed towards keeping the relationship. Information exchange is free and proactive, and there is a tendency toward adapting to changes. Harmonious conflict resolution is improved if the two parties try to resolve the conflicts by making mutually satisfying decisions. Mutual dependence is improved if the benefits of relationships cannot be obtained alone or through contracts with other person or other entities. Therefore, adding clauses in the IT contract should be governed by having these three goals in mind. To achieve these goals, you need to place certain elements in the contract. The first group of elements are categorized under foundation as they are the basis of any IT contracts. First, you need to specify service level objective. That is, you need to add clauses to the contract that clarify the expectations of the service recipient and the service provider from each other. The service level objectives must include organizational changes by the end of the contract, such as the processes and services that must be delivered. For example, a customer website must be delivered by the end of the contract. There must be statements in the contract that also clarify the capabilities each party must have. For example, the recipient, IVK, must be able to assign 5 employees who are familiar with the current backend system at IVK. The service provider, for example, must be able to educate in addition to service delivery. Our employees at IVK must also be taught how to use the backend system. The IT contract should include clauses related to process ownership plan as well. These clauses specify the processes that are delivered via the agreement, processes that directly affected by the services included in the agreement, and the processes that are required to manage the agreement between service recipient and provider. Finally, an IT contract should include service level contents, statements that specify the key metrics and quality targets. These clauses usually define the level of service that the service recipient expects. For example, the response time of the website must be 1 second or lower. The customer website should have the capacity for example, 250,000 concurrent users. So these are the targets that we need to specify in our contracts. The contract must include statements related to possible changes to the contract, service, and payment as well. There must be clauses that define processes for identifying and resolving unforeseeable demands, including prioritizing changes to the volume, type, or level of service to match the unpredicted user requirements. For example, if the number of concurrent users of a website is quadrupled due to COVID-19, having such related statements in the contract guides the two parties on how the new requirements should be prioritized and how the payment should change. The contract should include processes for implementing foreseeable contingencies and changes as well. If, for example, there is a chance that a new data privacy law is passed by the Parliament in 2 years, we need clauses that describe how the implementation of the new requirements is governed. As another example, if the service provider gets bankrupt or it is taken over by a competing company, we need clauses that describes what happens to the contract or payments. IT contracts are recommended to include processes for introducing new innovations and incentives to introduce innovations as well. For example, the contract can include a process that describes how the two parties organize a joint bi-monthly meetings to identify ways to increase performance, such as sharing ideas about increasing the speed of the delivery of new features. The contract may include even monetary incentives in the budget for those whose ideas implemented successfully. Finally, an IT contract must include feedback processes that describe how drawbacks are identified and how the changes will be implemented. There should be governance related clauses in the contract as well. Firstly, a contract should include statements related to communication policy, communication schedules, and reporting structure. Second, the contract should include a measurement charter that specifies what is to be measured, the measurement methodology, and what deviance triggers the feedback plan, the feedback process plan that we introduced in the previous slides. For example, in this part of the contract, we can have monthly measurements and report of user satisfaction as well as cost of service in comparison to other service providers by a third-party server company. The contract should also include conflict arbitration charter that specifies who arbitrates between the two parties and when to involve them. For example, in a contract between a Dutch company and an Indian IT service provider, you can say that the Dutch court arbitrates among the two parties when the service delivery is discontinued for more than 2 hours. Finally, a contract must include penalties definitions for different conditions, conditions under which termination may occur, and the exit responsibilities of each party. For example, if the response time of the website is higher than 1 second, the service provider has to pay 20,000 euros for each minute of high response time. My recommendation to Jim Barton, the CIO, is to include all the mentioned SLA components in the contract. Second, it seems that front loading is not going to be helpful to create mutual dependence and thus building trust and commitment between the two parties. Therefore, I agree with the softliners that front loading is not a good idea. I also recommend Jim Barton to definitely include the penalty definitions and formula, the termination conditions, and exit responsibilities in the contract. I agree with the hardliners in that sense. Uh, you can always decide not to enforce those penalty definitions, but having them shows how much these conditions, these service quality targets are important to you. So you make these requirements even more clear, even clearer to the other party. Pause here for a minute and try to answer this question and this one. In the next video, I discuss various service delivery models.